Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a story that is absolutely fascinating, and honestly, it's been hiding right in plain sight. We're going to look at how a massive, chaotic, incredibly physical problem, specifically the cross-border waste trade, is being completely transformed into a cutting-edge, data-driven solution. If you think moving construction waste is just about dump trucks and landfills, you're going to want to stick around, because your perspective is about to completely shift. We are literally moving from the gritty reality of dirt and debris straight into the realm of artificial intelligence. Let's get right into it. 3.19 million. That is the massive number of tons of Canadian waste imported into Michigan landfills in fiscal year 2025. Now, you might be wondering why that matters, but here is where the data gets incredibly interesting right off the bat. While that number sounds absolutely gargantuan, it's actually down 7.95% year over year from fiscal year 2024. So, the corridor is shrinking organically before any new policies or taxes from Washington or local governments have even touched it. But regardless of that dip, the sheer scale of material moving across this single border corridor is just staggering. And this brilliantly illustrates the real footprint here. Even with that near 8% decline we just talked about, Canadian imports still make up a massive 14.11% of every single piece of waste buried in the state of Michigan. It remains the largest single import source, for sure. We're talking about a physical supply chain that handles a deeply structural burden for Ontario.
So, here's our agenda for today. First, we'll cover Ontario's looming waste crisis. Second, tariffs, trash, and trade. Third, the Digital Refinery solution. And fourth, selling data, not wood.
Starting off with Section 1, Ontario's looming waste crisis.
To really understand the stakes here, listen to this quote from Calvin Lahan over at York University. He states, if, for whatever reason, the U.S. administration decided to close their borders to Canadian waste, we would face an immediate crisis that we simply do not have the infrastructure to manage. This isn't just hyperbole, it's a severe structural risk. Ontario recently generated over 16 million tons of waste and exported over 3.4 million tons to the U.S. A border closure represents an absolute infrastructural breaking point.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because based on primary data from Waste to Resource Ontario, we can actually chart this looming capacity cliff. In 2025, we know Michigan imports dropped by nearly 8%, but look out to 2034. If the U.S. border closes to Canadian waste, Ontario's landfill capacity is entirely exhausted, gone. And even if the border remains wide open and exports continue exactly as they are, Ontario still hits a hard wall and exhausts its capacity just 3 years later, in 2037. The ticking clock is totally real, no matter what happens at the border.
But we need to separate fact from industry fiction regarding why this cliff is approaching. You know, there's been this persistent myth floating around of an imminent $5 per ton Michigan tipping fee acting as this huge legislative threat to stop Canadian trash. The reality? Michigan's FY27 budget was enacted with zero new taxes. That $5 fee failed in 3 consecutive budget cycles. Right now, the only live vehicle is a stalled $1.2 per ton bill sitting in a hostile House chamber. So what you should really take away from this is that the impending crisis is driven by physical landfill capacity running out, not some immediate Michigan legislative tax.
Moving on to Section 2, Tariffs, Trash, and Trade.
Okay, let's dive into this table. While Michigan's local policies might not be shutting the border, international geopolitics certainly threaten to. Let's meticulously deconstruct the actual tariff exposure coming out of Washington, analyzing these purely as mathematical supply chain variables. Under the Most Favored Nation, or MFN-based duty, municipal solid waste actually sits at a 0% rate. It's completely duty-free. But under Section 301, all Canadian origin goods face a default 10% penalty. And then there's Section 338, which landed in August after U.S.-Canada trade talks stalled. While it spares raw municipal waste, it hits manufactured wood products, things like charcoal and plywood, with a massive 50% tariff.
This brings us to the most immediate financial threat since July. That 10% Section 301 duty applies to all Canadian origin goods across the board by default. The only way out, the goods most legally qualify for a USMCA, or CUSMA, as it's known in Canada, exemption. Think about that for a second. If you're moving material across the border into Michigan and you don't have airtight proof of origin, you are automatically getting hit with a 10% penalty on your declared value.
Which leads us directly to the ultimate shield against this tariff trap, the Certificate of Origin. This is the essential compliance document you absolutely must have to prove that your shipment qualifies under CIMA. By proving your origin perfectly, you effectively zero out that default 10% tariff. The problem, though, generating flawless compliance documents for totally chaotic loads of recovered construction wood is incredibly difficult. You really need a technological solution that can generate it instantly and flawlessly in the field.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Digital Refinery solution.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we solve this geopolitical headache using physical hardware right out in the dirt and mud. 905 Wood utilizes a highly advanced edge AI stack to do this. Their verified baseline right now operates on the Google Pixel 11 Pro, powered by the Tensor G5 and Android 16. But looking ahead, their T3 roadmap pushes toward the Google Pixel 11 Pro running Android 17. By integrating light art AI features, the device processes data locally and autonomously. This means perfectly accurate data capture happens instantly, right at the source of the waste, without needing constant cloud connectivity. It's a real game changer.
Let's walk through the exact user experience of this Digital Refinery application workflow. Step 1 is the request for quote, pulling in the initial data. Step 2, and this is where the magic happens, the AI stack autonomously handles the certificate of origin generation. Step 3 is rapid verification, and Step 4 yields a flawless compliance PDF output. What you're seeing here is AI operationalized in the field, instantly yielding bulletproof border compliance documentation before the truck even hits the highway.
This workflow elevates 905 Wood to what we call the Sentient Bridge. They're acting as this intelligent, sentient layer, sitting between entirely chaotic, unstructured physical construction waste and the highly structured, demanding compliance environments of the U.S. border and high-purity biocarbon markets. They are literally organizing physical chaos into flawless digital assets. Finally, Section 4, selling data, not wood. By operationalizing this hardware and software stack, a massive economic transformation of the 905 Wood business model is revealed. Let's look at the contrast. If you're selling physical wood, you are highly vulnerable. You are subject to those brutal 50% tariffs we talked about if it turns into charcoal. You're fighting the 2034 border capacity cliffs, and you're drowning in logistics chaos. However, if you're selling digital provenance data, you are dealing in a high-margin software as a service, or SaaS layer. This data is totally immune to physical border tariffs, and more importantly, it's exactly what secures your access to exclusive carbon markets like Puro.Earth.
And here is why that matters so much for the high-purity biocarbon market, because that U.S. Section 338 placed a 50% tariff on Canadian charcoal. The physical market is bleeding margin. But alternative circular bioeconomy markets like Puro.Earth don't just want physical biochar. They require incredibly strict digital measurement, reporting, and verification known as DMRV. This is the exact cryptographic proof required to show that the biochar actually sequestered carbon. Without the data proving exactly where that wood came from, the physical product is nearly worthless. Therefore, the value shifts entirely to the DMRV provenance data cut.
So the crucial point is this. The physical wood is really just the customer acquisition cost. The data itself, the flawlessly generated AI-verified provenance documentation, is the actual SaaS application service. That software layer is the true product, driving the future, and it is exactly what secures Ontario's industrial leadership in the emerging Canadian circular bioeconomy. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder today. When you look at those millions of tons of material crossing the Michigan border, ask yourself, are we just managing construction waste, or have we crossed a threshold where we are actually mining data for the circular bioeconomy? The next time you see a dump truck, remember, it might just be a mobile data center in disguise. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.